discretionary effort is probably the difference between winning and losing in all organisations. You're there as a leader to serve them. They don't work for you, you work for them. Would it be strange if Pep Guardiola didn't go to a game?
It would be. People will ask questions.
It would be odd. In fact, it's probably very rarely happened with any sports coach in the history of sport where they haven't bothered to turn up to the match.
So here at Engaged Care Talent, we're all about solving the care talent crisis one conversation at a time. And one of the big parts of that is conversations around leadership. And I've got just the person here to chat with me today, and that's Sean Hagger. How you doing, Sean?
Very well, thank you, Chris. Thanks for inviting me down.
Thanks for joining. It's been we've done some chats, but online before, so it's great to get you actually in the studio down in lovely Frisbee Park. It's always great to get some time together. It's really important, just I think, to take some time out, and I think, you know, especially if you think about health and social care, it's always high profile, but particularly since having the first Labour government back in power after 14 years. You know, we've just had the budget as well, the autumn budget. So there's a lot of focus on what could be done to service the health of a nation. So yes, you can make sure you bring in the right people into organisation. You can make sure that they are onboarded in the right way. But what comes to my mind often when I think about this is what you said before, is that if you have a people problem, you have a leadership problem. So before we go on to that, a bit of a quick intro. I mean, I know all about you and all that, but let's have a bit for people who are not in the know. Tell us a bit about what you do.
Yeah, well, I'm currently a senior consultant for a small consultancy called Legitimate Leadership. We work with organisations that are interested in improving their culture. It might have people problems. It might be a turn the boat around situation, or it might be a good to great situation. I've been doing that for about 3 years. Before that, I used this framework when I worked for a company called Johnson Maffey, and my last job there was as general manager of their UK operations in the auto catalyst division, which was great.
Big businesses, lots of people.
Yeah, about 1,000 people on that site at the time. I mean, I was tasked with closing that site, so I've led large organisations through difficult transformational change, applying the legitimate leadership framework to as good a result as you can expect in a situation like that.
Yeah, lovely. Well, that's great. I really like the different angles you come from, you know, and the fact that you've, you know, not only a leadership consultant now, but you've got all that experience of working with big organisations, you know, having to lead and, you know, with lots of people. So I think let's go back to this thing about if you've got a people problem, you've got a leadership problem. I think that is relevant to all organisations, and I think it is very, very relevant to be talking about that in the context of healthcare and social care. So, yeah, people problem, leadership problem. Let's discuss.
Well, what are your people problems when you look at an organisation? You know, how do they manifest themselves? It can be in recruitment. Can be difficult to attract people, and the other side of that, it's difficult to retain them when they're in the organisation. But plenty of people stay in an organisation when they're not fully engaged in it. There's some excellent surveys out there, top of the pile is probably Gallup, which is you know, 78 to 83% of the world's working population aren't engaged in their job. Staggering figure.
It's crazy. It's like $8 trillion in lost productivity.
Well, there you go. So
GDP of a country.
Well, what's the implication of people not being engaged in their work? And the implications of it are, you know, large. And the bigger the organisation, the easier it is to get lost in an organisation and not be engaged and kind of almost get away with it. So you've got that, you know, recruitment and retention side of things. You'll have things like high amounts of absence. So then you end up pulling more from the rest of the people there, which has an implication on morale, as well as the cost of paying for people not to be at work in the first instance. Years ago, it used to be called retiring on the job, and now we've reframed it to quiet quitting. But it's the same thing, isn't it? What are both of those things? Well, they're withdrawing your willingness, withdrawing your commitment to the organisation. So if, you know, you go back far enough, we had a phrase in this country called "Give me one volunteer over 10 pressed men."
Yes.
So the difference between willingly going above and beyond for the, you know, organisation's objectives, or not, could be as much as a factor of 10 to 1, which is why you're quoting some staggering figures at us. And there's much more beyond it. There's like, level of disciplinaries that you might have in an organisation. You have to employ more people, essentially, to do the same amount of work when engagement drops and willingness goes with it. And there's lots more. But you get the idea. So when you have these people problems, it's very easy for leaders to, and I've been there, I've done this. I've sat in a leadership position and gone, they're the problem. They need to change. I've done that. And the definition of insanity is to do the same thing and expect a different result. So at one point we sat around as a leadership team and I said, I'm sorry about this, everybody, but that's our fault. We need to change the stimulus if we want them to change. So these people problems are quite clearly a manifestation of a leadership issue, in my opinion.
Actually, and you think about interactions that we have with organisations. You talk about your journey into London today, and the interaction you had with somebody on the way here, and them clearly not really caring about what they have to do or a service they have to offer. You put that in a health or social care context, where literally someone feels that they have their health in someone's hands. That's a massive issue, isn't it?
Well, it has far-reaching implications for us as people who might be engaging with that health and social care system. And you said at the beginning you can chuck money at it, and obviously an improvement in an organisation can be brought about by an increase in investment, and I'm not going to deny that that's true. And I don't know if, say, the NHS, for instance, is underfunded or not, or it's just inefficient, or it's a combination of all of those things. I've heard people, because I worked at the NHS for the last 18 months in various trusts, and I've heard people say both of those things. It's underfunded and it's inefficient.
Often the answer is in the middle, isn't it? The difficult answer to find is in the middle.
And but ultimately, if we do have a leadership, and these organisations, particularly the NHS, there's 1.1 million people in the whole thing. Breaking that down into trusts, one of the trusts I work with has 27,000 people in it. That is a huge amount of people in one area. And obviously, in my mind at least, the way that that's organised is very important, and leaders play a huge role in the stability and the functioning of that organisation. I don't think anyone thinks that leadership's not important, but at the same time, it's not a profession. So we don't actually train people to do it. You're good at something. One day someone says, here you go, have a promotion. And 45 people. And you go, oh, how do I do that? And the door's already shut.
And they continue to be good at what they do.
Yeah.
Just be more senior and doing stuff that you shouldn't be doing.
Or they carry on doing the job they used to do, because that's the job they know how to do.
Exactly.
And they end up being extremely busy because of it. If you want to want me to show you a micromanager, I'll just go and find the busiest person.
Yeah, that's true.
Because if you've got 7 people underneath you and you want to do all 7 jobs, it's going to take a while.
Well, I think we should talk about one of the takeaways from this conversation is so therefore kind of what should leaders of teams or leaders of organisations actually do to make sure that they are doing what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a big answer to that question. First of all, I think I'd sort of pose the question of what is it that motivates people to give their best at work? And I think traditionally we've thought, and I still think this is out there, even though most people don't agree with it, salary and working conditions. And they are motivational to a point, as Hertzberg refers to, their hygiene factors. I.e., you can't pay people underneath the market rate and you can't provide terrible working conditions. But anything above that's not really going to motivate them to give their best.
Yeah.
So what does? And there's lots of theories, people out there that are more expert on this than me. And the competitive advantage of motivating people to work can be as much as 70%. Gary Hamill talks about this in his book. So what is it that motivates people beyond pay and working conditions, which really don't when it comes to giving your very best day in, day out of work? We've broken it down at LL into the 3 Ps, not parking, pension and pay, Chris, which is exactly what most people say, but a passion for the craft, which you're going to find in healthcare, You know, people take a lot of pride in their work.
Yeah.
A noble purpose, again, you're going to find this in healthcare.
Yeah.
Because they're doing something of a higher order than self-interest. And the third thing is people. People will go above and beyond for others. And if you're a leader, you can initiate those things in people all day, every day. You can help, you can be the person that other people are inspired to give their best for. You can ignite a passion in the craft for them, or you can suppress it, up to you. And you can bring about in them an understanding of their purpose in the bigger picture and the fact that they make a difference in the world. Happiness and purpose are intrinsically linked.
Well, actually, you argue that there's a massive amount of discretionary effort that is put into organisations such as the NHS because of people's kind of emotional and emotive connection with caring for others. But then there's a time when actually that discretionary effort can be hard to rely on, and leaders need to do more to be able to not rely on that.
Well, I mean, discretionary effort is a very interesting term that you've used there. Discretionary effort is probably the difference between winning and losing in all organisations. And I think what you end up with in the healthcare, because there's an intrinsic passion and noble purpose, despite the quality of the leadership, you end up with people giving their best, highly willing, more often. Now, the problem with that over a long period of time, and something which I think we've seen since COVID, where people obviously went above and beyond the call of duty, that's not sustainable, and it's wearing people out. And if they're not receiving the same thing from their leadership, and by all means, I'm not saying that that's happening in the NHS. I mean, it will be in pockets because it's such a big organisation.
Yeah, bound to,
when they don't receive that recognition and that praise, and also the other side of being helped to grow when they're not performing to their best, if they don't receive that feedback from their leadership, any human being would start to drift. Their willingness would start to drop. That's where leaders are really earning their crust.
And it's really interesting what's happening, now in terms of, things like pay. That's something where the budget, the autumn budget, is addressing in terms of looking at tens of billions of pounds put aside. And there is talk about, although we know that the 10-year plan for the NHS is coming in the spring, is that the chances are that a big chunk of those billions will be put into people's salaries, their pay slips. So that's really, really important for sure. But when it comes to people listening to this, what else can they do? Which is, because it's not necessarily something you do overnight in terms of address leadership issues. But there's things you can do to get those. We talked earlier on in previous episode about marginal gains. So what can they do?
Yeah, good question. So if you think about what we've been saying, organisations succeed or fail to the degree to which people give discretionary effort. They're giving. So how do we incite giving in people? What's the give from leadership in that scenario? And it's not pay. That's expected. That's just fair. And it's not conditions. So what is it that they need to provide? And we've asked people this question for 30 years, all over the world, in different industries and at different levels of the hierarchy, and we get the same answer back all the time. Who is the person that you'd work for willingly, give discretionary effort for, give your very best for, describe them? And they give us, obviously you can imagine, lots of different words. It's the worst part of my 2-day introduction because I have to write them all down on a flip chart. But then we break it down again, and we break it down again. And we think it comes down to 2 themes. The degree to which you're prepared to care for the people in your charge as human beings, not as human resources. Do you develop personal relationships with them? Do you know what makes them tick? Are you willing to lift the bonnet and really understand who they are and what drives them? And that takes a lot of effort and energy and self-sacrifice on your part. But it's not that alone. In fact, if you just cared for your people, you wouldn't actually develop the high levels of trust, willingness, and maybe loyalty that you need to alone, because you also need to grow them.
Yeah.
You need to grow them to help them to become the best they can possibly be. And some of that's hard behaviour and some of that's soft behaviour. Now, those two gives have some implications. Firstly, you're there as a leader to serve them. They don't work for you, you work for them. Because if you want to lead them, you first have to mobilise their consent to lead them in the first place. And anyone who's been a parent will know this.
Absolutely.
You're powerless until they start to listen to you. You know, I asked my little girl to tidy her room. Erin, would you tidy your room, please? No. Now what have I got? I've literally got nothing. So the only thing I can do in that situation is try and control her. And I use sticks and carrots to do that. Tidy your room, or I'll take your toys away. So she tidies her room. But I'm motivating her through fear, not through willingness. Or I can be a bit softer and I can say, tidy your room and I'll give you a big bag of sweets. I'm motivating her through greed this time. So if you want a culture through fear and greed, then control people through the skillful use of sticks and carrots. I don't think that's what we're looking for.
That's very true.
So if you want to get to and by the way, the stick only works for so long, because I say, take your toys away. In 3 weeks' time, she goes, what else you got, big fella?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. That's true. It's human behaviour, which naturally continues as we get older. It's just psychology.
Well, we're actually, a lot of people are taught to do this. They're taught to manage people.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But you don't manage people, you manage things. You're supposed to lead people. You start to manage me, that's going to upset me a little bit. And what does she do after 3 weeks of getting this bag of sweets? She wants a bigger bag of sweets. So this is not sustainable, but they are convenient because they do work in the short term, but they don't work in the long term, and they don't generate willingness in people. Care and growth is what generates willingness in people, and it's hard work for leaders.
How do you get that balance right? Because I've experienced myself, but also read a lot about it, where you need to help them gain mastery over their field, so they feel that they are contributing to that purpose, but also have that autonomy, that they can get on and do something. But there are also times when you have to kind of step in and go, right, I need to provide direction here and support. So how do leaders get that balance right?
A lot of effort, a lot of internal thought processes, and looking at yourself and where you're spending your time. None of this comes without you spending time with your people. So let's take somebody like that's in the public eye that's very well known, like Pep Guardiola.
Yeah, Pep. Yeah.
Pep, would it be strange if Pep Guardiola didn't go to a game?
Yeah, it would be. People will ask questions.
It would be odd. In fact, it's probably very rarely happened with any sports coach in the history of sport where they haven't bothered to turn up to the match. Or what about training and coaching, and when they're doing behind the scenes stuff? They're there. They're spending time with their people. So leadership doesn't happen from your office, right? And when Pep Guardiola is at the game, does he spend all 90, or these days 105 minutes, staring at the scoreboard?
Pep time. Used to be Fergie
Pep
time.
time used to be Fergie time. Does he spend all that time staring at the scoreboard? Where's his focus? Scoreboard or players?
Yeah,
he's watching the pitch. Because he's using the scoreboard, because if he's losing, he needs to know, and he needs to make some adjustments to the pitch. But his focus is not on that. He's flicking his eyes up every now and again. He doesn't even need to. He knows the score. He's watching the game. But now put this into a business context. How many leaders spend most of their time away from their people or in the office, not watching the game? Or when they are watching the game, they're really auditing them and waiting for them to make a mistake so they can pick them up on it.
Yeah.
Or when the result's not going very well, essentially what they're doing is sitting back in the training ground, phone the captain every 10 minutes for an update. So you end up sending more and more reports. None of this is value-adding activity. So Pep Guardiola's watching the players on the pitch. He's spending time with them. He's been very clear about what the best sports teams, every player on that pitch knows their job. right? The left back knows their job, the right back knows their job, the goalkeeper, and they've all got distinct accountabilities on the pitch. So how many times have you been in an organisation where we're tripping over each other? We don't actually, it's like cub football where they all run around like that. Yeah. They're all trying to do the same thing because we all want to score and we're all getting in each other's way. So one of the things that they do very well is they define unique accountabilities for all the people in the team, because that's what high functioning teams do. That means that they can help each other, because it's clear if the left back's not where they should be one day, what happens? Someone covers for them. In a team where they don't have defined accountabilities and the left back goes missing, they're all scratching their heads and suddenly you can see the goal. So they're watching the game, they spend time with their people, they know their people on a personal basis. They have defined direction of where they want to get to, and they have defined accountabilities for everybody on the pitch. Start doing those things tomorrow and you'll start to see an improvement. And one other thing that Pep Guardiola does, and we use this video sometimes, courtesy of my colleague Tony. I think Raheem Sterling had just scored a hat-trick in the FA Cup final. And he had his arm around him and he was giving him some, strong coaching accountability.
Oh, yes.
Because he didn't track back for one of their opportunities that the other team had, I think it was Watford or whoever, nearly scored. And he's going, I just scored a hat-trick. And Pep's going, yeah, but that wasn't good enough. So he's giving him accountability as well. That's the other thing that those top sports coaches do really well. They praise and they recognise when people consistently do a good job, and they will have what we call a censure conversation. When your standards drop willingly, you decide to drop your standards underneath the acceptable levels.
So one of the things I see and have heard often is classic thing of leaders going, my door is always open. So sometimes it actually is, but sometimes it isn't. Well, let's go into a bit more about the kind of the, obviously it's dependent on context and the organisation, but what are the other kind of, practical things that leaders can do to make sure that actually are going to be looking at the pitch, spending time with their people?
I mean, for above and beyond, you've got to get your calendar sorted out.
Okay.
So you can't be a leader if you don't make time for it. If you don't make time for it, and I can't go to the shop and buy you more time. There's a finite amount.
No, it's true.
So you've got to spend your time wisely. But that phrase, my door is always open, is actually a segue into a very interesting concept. And it's a foundational concept that sits at the base of everything we think and believe in legitimate leadership. And that is your intent, your motive. Now, we only build trust, willingness and loyalty in others when they perceive our intent to be one of serving their best interests instead of our own. Now, what does that phrase, my door's always open, what does that actually mean? Because in your heart, you might be thinking, I'm here for you, but what do they hear?
Oh, you want to come to me?
I'm going to go to you, have I?
Yeah.
Right, you'll stay planted.
Connection, responsibility.
And I'll come to you. Now, whose interests is served in that scenario? Yours, because you don't have to do anything, right?
But I've said I'm here.
But I've said I'm here, and people feel a bit manipulated when that sort of stuff's handed out. They feel a little bit like, okay, you're saying it, but the actions don't match up with the words. So I don't believe, or somebody once said this to me, action and intent don't line up. Right? So that's really fundamental. So it's a change of heart that we argue for first, not a change of head. Are you willing to put the things that are important to you to one side and do the right thing? Because that tests you as a leader, which is why being a parent's hard, because it involves a lot of self-sacrifice. Absolutely. It's exactly the same thing when you're a leader. You've got to put all of your agenda away and start focusing on your people. So are you willing to stay late one day to help to coach them? Are you going to put your pursuit of your career and your, the things that are important to you, are you going to put that over there and then help someone get better at what they're doing, or maybe hold them to account? When you have to go and have a difficult conversation with somebody who has not performing, they need you to do that. It's not helpful and empowering to let me drown. Right, so you might have to say, you're not really meeting the standards of the organisation here. That's a hard conversation to have. And when you don't have it, whose interests are you serving? Your own, because it's easier to walk away than it is to confront it.
It's a great chat. I think there's a couple of things I think left to talk about. There's plenty more we can leave for other conversations for sure. But
Yeah, of course.
But it's, I think, it's that thing about managing your own time.
Yeah.
And that thing about being intentional. So what else can people do to kind of be more intentional with what they do have control of, which is their own time?
Well, funnily enough, people feel out of control of their own time. Yeah. And the first thing is for them to realise that they do where you spend your time is actually mostly your choice.
That's true.
And I don't think the world's very noisy now. You know, so the phone, your emails are at you all the time, bing, 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 you know, and it's normally other people's problems, isn't it? It's normally other people wanting their agenda is coming into your inbox. So you've got to be, I'm a great believer in standardising your diaries, having a nice cadence in your organisation, and the critical few meetings that are absolutely essential. And they are time in your diary to go and watch the game. It can be 5 minutes, it could be an hour, it could be half a day. If people are office based, then there's various different ways that you can do it. You're always watching the game, but it's time with your people, like Pep does. The second thing you can do is make sure you're having lots of value-adding team meetings where the purpose of the meeting is to grow the team. And otherwise, how are we working together to achieve our common goals? And the third thing they do is make sure they have lots of one-to-ones in where we're not progressing the work, we're trying to progress the person. You do need progress the work meetings in your diary, obviously. We do need to manage the things in our yes, that's absolutely critical. I'm not anti-management. I think you've got to be a good manager. But if you apply the same logic to people, you're going to go wrong. So you need to have meetings in your diary where you're growing the person, because Pep knows if he coaches the players on the pitch and they're better players, he'll get better results. So if you spend time coaching your people so that they are more capable, more empowered, and they reach their potential, the results will come. But quite a lot of time, you're under pressure as a leader. The accountability of those results sits on you from people higher up the organisation. And we intrinsically get fear then, and we start to act in a way that's not conducive to this. So displaying a lot of courage in those situations is what's imperative.
So actually, let's take a really, really busy team, overstretched.
Yeah.
The classic thing about I don't have time to have this one-to-one meeting or this team meeting.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that doesn't happen? How do you counter that?
Well, first of all, you can't afford not to have that meeting. You need to understand that X equals Y here. If you want to be busy forever and basically paddling really hard and not getting anywhere, then carry on doing that. You have to break into that, and there has to be a belief, and that belief is given credence when you start to do it and you see positive results. All right, so that's the first thing that people have got to have the courage to break the cycle. And the second thing that I quite often see in organisations is initiative overload. Okay. There's 30 things to do. Well, how many did we do last year? 2. Why are we doing 30 this year? Because our maximum appears to be 2 currently. So why? So we all end up moving lots of things along very slowly, and they never get to completion, or they just run out of fashion. Like the organisations move quicker than this. Oh, we're not doing that anymore. So destructive, isn't it? So what we've got to do is we've got to be very good at prioritising the next thing to do. So that, and that's a skill that leaders need to develop. What is the most important thing next? And let's get that done to not either completion or a point where it can sit comfortably and has added some value. We try and move too many things on at once, in my experience.
Well, actually, in another episode we recorded here was with Nathan East, who owns home care organisation, and he said that I can have lots and lots of things to do on my to-do list, and actually I've reframed it by going, if I do 2 things on that list that are moving the sector forward, moving the caring of others forward, and making that difference, then I'm doing the right thing. So for me, there's that connection with being clear about what the purpose is. You could obviously, the purpose of an organisation like the NHS is more obvious than others, but to tie what the team is doing into that overall purpose.
Well, it's a well-known fact that people who set goals are more productive and successful than people that don't. So that's why we have objectives in organisations. So how often do the leaders really spend time on the annual objectives and appraisal, or is it a tick box exercise? So that's important. Then we need to give people clear deliverables and accountability about what your part on the pitch is to deliver these objectives. And a very simple question you can ask before you set out for the day is, everything we're doing adding value?
Yeah.
And try and clear out other people's problems and time wasters out of your diary. Thing is, this is Eisenhower's time matrix if you want to look it up, but if you're in box 1 and box 2, if you're in box 1, which is fighting fires all the time, then that's all you're ever going to do is fight fires. And some people enjoy that. They like it's exciting. They like to be the hero.
Knowing those people,
It's not particularly productive. It's not a very good organisational philosophy. Fires are going to happen, and when they do, we should address them. But not everything's a fire, and you can actually bring other people in to help put the fires out. You need to spend time in the important but not urgent box, planning, root causing, leadership activities. And funnily enough, that will result in less fires. So, that's where you need to be.
Yeah, this goes back to the thing about being intentional with your time and focusing on things that are going to have the biggest impact on the business. Look, it's been great to chat. Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
And we'll pick it up again for sure in the future.
We will,
as always.